Hazel from Hazel A Patterns. Welcome to my latest video. Today we are going to be making the extra large wet and dry wash bag. Now you may have seen this pattern on sale before. It's one of my most popular patterns for a small double compartmented wash bag. This one's in use. This is actually my son's now because, you know, everything I make has to be used for somebody. So what you can see though, this really is a weekender sort of bag. The idea is you can just chuck it in your suitcase, go away quickly, you've got enough stuff to hold for a couple of days. But obviously there are many of us that have big families or like to take all our stuff with us. So let me introduce you to the extra large wet and wash bag. This is it. You can see basically, if we want to compare the two, it is almost double the height of the original. So we still have every detail is the same. Otherwise, we've got two pockets at the front, big deep pockets now, which there were little ones before. Same on the other side. And we have two compartments on the top. Both of them are big enough to hold a big bottle of shampoo or micellar water or whatever you want to take with you when you go away. So let's pop that to one side. I will show you what we're going to be making today. So this is the one from the photo tutorial. This is the tutorial itself. So when you buy this pattern, you get a 4-page tutorial with all the details of what you're making. You also get full pattern pieces, not just for the extra large wash bag, but for the original one as well. So you get 12 pages of patterns, including this cutting chart to help you to plan what you are doing. So today in this video, we are, excuse me, just had a little bit of an accident with one of the lights there. Never mind. We're going to be making this one here. Same fabric as I used for the top of the other one, but this is one of my favourite Mona Luna fabrics from So Fabulous Fabrics. And we are also, as a little bonus, going to be making a wrist strap. So we're using this tutorial here, wrist straps 4 ways, which is free from my website. The links will be below. I think I've talked enough. I think you want to get on with it now. Let's do some sewing. Before you begin sewing, you need to cut out all the pieces listed on your cutting chart, fuse interfacing to the outer pieces, and then fuse the fleece over the top of that with a margin of 1/4 inch showing all round. Then you need to transfer the pattern markings on the gusset pieces to the wrong side. So that's the outer gusset pieces and the lining gusset pieces. If you were planning to make the smaller size rather than the bigger size, you notice that you've got lines on the patterns. So just fold them up. Obviously some of the pieces are going to be quite long, so fold them in again. And then when you cut them out, just cut out the smaller sizes. And one last thing is, if you are cutting the smaller size, when you go to put this piece together, you actually don't need the bottom part, 11B. You only need the top part to make the pocket. And now you're ready to go. We're going to start by putting the top zips on. Now I'm using continuous zipping, and I don't know if you can see here, I've put 3 zip heads on already. There is a reason for that. I will come to that in a minute. The 2 ways you can do zips, or there are other ways, but the 2 ways I prefer to do zips are either to use double-sided tape. I've got a 1/4 inch double-sided tape here. and I would literally run this along the top of the piece between the outer and the zip, and then I would put another layer on between the zip and the lining. This is really useful if you've got a particularly slippery fabric that's going to try and shift as you're working with it. But today I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to show you the method that I like to use with minimal pins and clips, but getting you a perfect zip every time. The first thing we're going to do, we're going to take our outer upper, one of the pieces that goes on the side of the top, and I'm going to lay that face up. We're going to take our zip and lay it face down. Now, I'm trying really hard not to waste zip, but I'm always a little bit concerned because these zips sometimes creep. I mean, I remember with this one that I ordered it, the actual tape is a little tiny bit stretchy, so I'm actually going to lay it just about 1/4 of an inch longer than it needs to be. And at the moment, I'm just using my fingers to hold it in position. Now, the lining goes face down. I'm using a completely double-sided fabric, so you can't tell, but pretend it's face down and that you can see. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to line that up with the end, line all of this up, and I'm just going to put a single clip in. You notice I haven't cut the zipping. This is a really great way to get the zip head out of the way so you don't actually cause any bumps or make any uneven stitching. Right, let's go over to the machine. So anybody that's watched my videos before knows that I am the absolute world's worst for putting my hands in front of the camera. So I've got 2 cameras set up with the hope that between the 2 of them you will actually see what's happening. So first of all, I'll just show you where we left off. We've got the 3 zip heads to the left of what we're doing. I've got my 1 clip in place, and what I'm going to do is start this off on my machine. Now I've got my zipper foot put on. This zipper foot is just the one that came with my machine. It's nothing special. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take this clip out so you can see what we're doing, and I'm also going to make sure I have got I'm using the 1/4 inch marker just here at the front of the machine with the foot to make sure I get the correct amount of seam allowance. So I don't know if you can see there, but I've actually started about 1/4 of an inch in from the end of the zip, and I'm going to put my needle down first of all. So that has anchored everything, and it means you don't get any creep as you start off. So let's go back just to the end, and then this is where you use your hands to hold everything in place very, very precisely. So what I've done there, it's probably about 2 inches away from the zipper. I'm holding it really tight, and this is where you might miss out because you might get my hands in the way. But all I'm going to do is I'm going to stitch forward till I'm just in front of where my fingertip is. I'm going to stop. I'm going to put the zip back down again about 2 inches, holding it tight and making sure everything's lined up, and here we go again. I'm going to keep doing exactly that until it's all done, and I'll show you the seam at the end. I'm using a dark thread. I might normally try and use something paler so it doesn't show, but obviously it matches my outer fabric but not the zip or the lining. You need to be very careful that you remember to move your fingers before you get to the needle, because what you do not want to do is sew through your fingers. Ouch. As I said, if you're using a really slippery lining, you might find you want to use the tape but this is really stable. This is a waterproof canvas. It's a 4 ounce. There we go. And you can see at the end, everything is lining up, which is what we had hoped for. So I'm just going to back tack. And you can see there, we've got a nice seam, 1/4 inch all the way down. You can check that against the fusible fleece, because you know that that's 1/4 inch away. I mean, you can flip it and do it from the outer, but I find I sometimes get a bit of a problem with the fleece that nothing feeds as well. So I tend to go with the lining side up. So what we're going to do now is going to flip it back. Whoops. I've done that before, haven't I? Okay. And I'm going to literally use my fingernail to finger press that back and do the same with the front. And then I'm going to change my foot. I like to use my open-toed foot. Oops. This is where everything tries to slide off. So, open-toed foot. I'm going to turn my stitch length up to 3 and going to make sure that's pulled back. Now we want about 1/8 of an inch showing before we do our top stitching. Sorry, my brain's not functioning. I'm just so excited that I actually managed to get both cameras working. So there we go. I'm just actually going to run the edge of one side of the foot down and just start with whatever you've got. You can back tack, and I'm going to make sure I pull this neatly out of the way as I go, because what you don't want is for your lining to be bubbling up underneath the zip on the inside, because it could then cause you a problem when you try and close the bag. Again, if you do this a little bit at a time, you can keep an eye on where you've got to. So there's our top stitch seam, top stitched on the inside as well, and we will go back over to the cutting desk and I'll show you the next stage. So this is the piece we've just stitched. You can see it's all lining up nicely and ready to put the next side of the lining on, and we're going to attach the outer centre front, the little strip here. So the first thing we need to do is make sure we cut 1/4 inch off the top of this lining. If it's any help to remind you, when you look at it, you can see that this piece actually measures the same as the other pieces, but without the seam allowance. So we're going to put that down so that the right side is facing up. So essentially, right side of that lining to right side of this lining. Then we're going to lay our original piece on top of it. Now again, you can line everything up. Make sure that it starts in the same place, because obviously you need it to line up. Oops. When we go to make the lining. That's it. And then this piece here goes face down. Again, line everything up. I'm going to do exactly the same with the zip as I did before. So I'm just going to pop that clip in there. I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and stitch it. And this time when I do the top stitching, I'm not going to top stitch through the lining. I am literally just going to top stitch the top and the zip. So I'll show you that when I've sewn it. You see, we've just finished and top stitched our centre section. The top stitching is just done through the outer and the zip. Obviously, that's the seam allowance of the lining that you can see there. So when you flip it open, you can see this here is not top stitched. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to sort out the zip. Now, obviously we need to have the zip head within the area of the top of the bag, but to make life easier, so we haven't got this flapping zip here at the end, which is going to be harder to deal with, I'm going to pull the second zip head down. Now you can see it just leaves a gap there. But if you bring that right down to where your first zip head is, which is now in the centre, and then it travels back, and you've now got nice closed zip at both ends. Now obviously once you start moving the zip around, it will start working as normal. But it means you can now cut this off. You can then trim the other end. And then you're ready to do the other side. So we're going to do the outer, and then we're going to attach the whole thing together. I will show you what that looks like when we're done. That's the centre section completed now. What I forgot to mention in the last little bit of filming, but hopefully you read the instructions, is that you need to start with your zip on the right hand side for the second piece, so that when it's all turned around, everything is on the same side and on the left. So now I'm going to explain to you what the third zipper pull is for. So you pull this one back into the centre exactly like before, and if you didn't have this third zipper pull on, you would end up with a little flappy bit here, which will naturally want to sort of pull apart when you're trying to deal with the stitching the top together. So pull your zipper head down exactly like you did before, and there we go. So now I'm going to cut that off in exactly the same way we did last time. Trim this end as well. My best dressmaking scissors are just going, ah! There we go. And that's us ready to go and do the next stage, which is to complete the two lining compartments. Now, both of these compartments on this lining are going to be made in exactly the same way, apart from one has a turning gap in, the other doesn't. So you're going to take your bottom two pieces and stitch them together. As you can see, I have prepared one already. So left a gap in the middle. I would err on the side of bigger rather than smaller, because this is a big beast when it is made. Now, here is our lining gusset piece, and you can see it's got two dots and it's got a line on it. That is for the bottom, because that line is going to match up to our centre seam. So the first thing we need to do, and I've marked that on the reverse. So what we need to do is match up the corner of this piece with it pointing downwards to the corner of the compartment there. I'm going to pop a clip in just to hold that for now. And then we're going to do the same on the other side. Now, we're going to stitch these. It's going to be a pain, I won't lie to you, because this is a really tiny seam and it's a bit fiddly to get into. But as long as you are at least 1/4 of an inch in, that's fine, because the rest of it, the gap that's going to be left in the middle, will be sealed up later. So stitch as far as you can from the edge to the centre, or from the centre to the edge, and do the same on both sides. I'm going to go and do that, and I will then show you what it looks like when that section's done. I've completed that little step. I'll show you how far I managed to get in, and I was using my ordinary 1/4 inch foot, so I managed to get just up to close to the zipping on that side, and the same on the other side. So there's a little gap left in the middle, but don't worry about that. We will definitely be dealing with that later. The next thing we're going to do is, where we have the mark here, that mark needs to line up with the bottom seam. So I'm going to pop that there. Put a clip to hold it in place. Now, in the original version of this, I actually had a grown-on gusset. The video is still on YouTube if you want to see it, because you will see me sewing with my beloved red sewing machine, which unfortunately passed away, as these things do. This version, because it's slightly different and isn't grown on, we're going to need to stitch between the dots. So between that dot and the other dot, and leave the edge free, because that's then going to make it easier for us to turn and pull and stitch our corner seams. So I'm going to go and stitch that, and I will show you again at the next stage. Here we go. This is what we've ended up with. So we've got that's going to be our side gusset. These are going to end up being seams in a minute. And what we need to do next is flip this over and cut down just into the seam allowance on the main long piece, just to above the stitching there. That's going to make it easier for us to pull and turn. So we do the same on both ends of the stitching. There we go. And now what we're going to do is this corner here where we've cut, and of course this corner here where we've just stitched, are going to form the corners of our bag. So I like to use a pin on this. I try and do it just in the seam allowance, because obviously with waterproof fabric you do not want to put too many holes in it, because it will cease to be waterproof. So that's there. On this one, it's a much longer seam. I'm actually going to put a couple of clips in place just to hold it. And then when we sew, what we need to do is we need to sew from here down to that seam, or from the seam upwards, whichever's easiest for you. Then we're going to flip the seam allowance, and we're going to stitch from the stitching down to the bottom. We need this seam allowance because we need to be able to match it to the rest of the seam allowance later on. I've done the second side as well, so you can see we've now got our seam allowances free. We've stitched up to the top, down to the bottom. I've stopped just where the stitching was before, because we know that's exactly where our dots were, where it meets. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to trim off the excess around the corner there, because that will make it sit nicer in the bag. And then if I pull that out, you can see this zip is now being held downwards. So it does get a little bit harder from here on in, because obviously the zip is bent and it would probably rather be straight. But I'm going to carry on, and I'm going to do the other side and the other compartment. And then I will show you what it looks like when it's done. Our lining compartments are done. You can see we've got turning gap left in one of them. The other one's completely sealed up, and all 8 of the corner seams are actually stitched, and I've clipped the corners as well. So the last thing we need to do to finish off this section is join everything together so that we can close our lining gaps. So this is where you need to have a bit of hand strength. So first of all, you're going to match the corner of your compartment to the corner of your outer. Put a clip in place. Do the same on the other side. And then you're going to need to pull the lining compartment away from your outer, because when you stitch through, you just literally want to stitch through within the seam allowance. Now for the centre section, again, this is where it's going to be a little bit harder to do because it's going to try and pull against you. But if you fold one end down, pull the other end and fold it over the top, so you've got a nice flat section. Again, I'm going to pop a clip in. You could possibly use a pin instead if you want to be really sure that you don't yank it off. And I'm going to put a couple more clips in just over the zip itself. So I'm going to stitch at just under 1/4 of an inch. Probably do it from this side to start with. Stitch along, make sure I've got everything. Then, if necessary, flip it over and stitch again. I'll do the same at the other side, and then we'll be ready to complete the outer. And there we have it. I've stitched across the ends there. At the other end, it might take you a couple of goes to get it level because everything wants to shift around as you're stitching it. It doesn't matter if the compartments have slightly pulled down, it's just really to hold them in place so that you can use your bag. But now you can see the shape that it started to form at the top there. The next stage then is to make the front pockets and complete the outer. And we're back to zips again. So we're going to create the 2 front pocket zips. You can see I've done the trick with the 3 zipper pulls again, but this time I'm using a number 3 zip because it's a little bit neater on the pocket. So same as before, we turn the zip over so it's face down. I'm just going to slightly extend it beyond the edge, exactly the same reason as before, so that I get a nice neat finish. Just going to clip that in position while I grab my lining piece, and you can see it's a really long piece here, so again assuming that that would be face down, line it up with everything, put your clip in, and I will go over and sew that on the machine. And here we have our top stitch zip. You can see I just top stitched through the outer and the zip itself, not through the lining again. So now we are going to lift the whole thing up and line up the zip at the top edge. Again, I'm going to put a clip in just to hold it. Maybe a second one. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get our bag. The zip's on the left to this side, so it's the zip's to the left on this side, and it's this shorter end here. We're going to need to squish it a little bit to actually get it to sit flat, because everything wants to bounce up now. But I'm going to pop that in place. That's nicely lined up. In fact, I'm just going to put a couple of extra clips in to hold it before I take it over to the machine, because as you can see it keeps wanting to curve away, and then I'm going to go and stitch it in exactly the same way and then top stitch it again. So here we go, I have finished stitching the zip. exactly the same method as I used before, and again I've top stitched it through just the outer and the zip itself, so not through the main body of the lining. So the next thing we need to do is the same trick as we did before. Let's get our zip head into the centre. The main reason for putting it in the centre is to make sure that it doesn't get in the edges when we go to stitch these corner seams. So I'm going to do the same thing, pulling that zip head down and doing it back up again, which gives us a nice neat edge. So I'm going to cut that off. I'm going to trim off the other side. And then one last thing we need to do is pull this nice and tight, the pocket bag, so that we're sure that it's out of the zip. Put a couple of clips in. Do the same on the other side. If your pocket bag is really overhanging for any reason, you can trim it off at this point, but this is fine. And then what we're going to do now is I'm going to stitch down across the zip to stop the ends from coming off while we're working on it, and stitch down the pocket bag so that it's all one piece. Then I'm going to do the other side, the only difference being that I will have the zip on the right hand side instead of the left. Oh, and one last thing, just in case you're interested, this is how I store my zipping so it's ready to work with. Okay, I will go and stitch these bits, do the other pocket, and then show you what it looks like. So now we've completed both sides, exactly the same, and just to show you on the inside, you can see everything's joined nicely in here. So the next little thing we're going to do is a small segue away from the main body of the bag, and we are going to do the pull tabs. So this is a really straightforward thing to do, and something that I do over and over in my patterns. We're going to start off with a square of fabric. I think the pattern piece is about 2 inches by 2 inches, and we're going to fold it in half and press it. And then we're going to open it out and fold the fold the outer edge into the centre, press, and do the same on the other side. Then fold it all back in together. As you can see in this patterned piece, there isn't any of the pattern that's showing, but it doesn't matter because it's only going to show a little bit when it's actually finished. What you're going to do then is edge stitch down both edges of your piece. Here's the one I did earlier. And then we're going to, on one of them, you have the choice. If you want to have a wrist strap, then you can actually thread it through a D-ring, which is what I'm going to do. Take our bag, and I'm going to have the one with the D-ring on the end where the zippers pull closed to. It's up to you entirely. I'm going to clip that on and then take it over to the sewing machine and stitch it in place at about 1/8 of an inch, just to hold it for the when we go to sew the seam later. Now, my little trick with this is I always put the needle down right in the centre of the piece. Then I reverse back to one side, go forwards, and then reverse back to the middle. That will hold it securely, but also will make sure that the edges won't shift against each other. I will show you when I've done. And there we go. You can see that's the side without the D-ring and the other side with the D-ring, just secured with that extra stitching, which just gives it a bit more security when you come to use it later. You will have found when you went to stitch this that you would have had to really squish everything down flat to get it under this machine, but that's what we did, squished it right down with everything out of the way, and that made it nice and secure. So the next thing we're going to do is we're actually going to finish off the bag. So the first thing we're going to do to finish off the outer is stitch the bottom seam of the bag. But before we do that, just a little reminder, I mentioned earlier in the pattern to open the top zip by a couple of inches. I haven't done that yet because I like to leave it sort of together. But now I'm going to make sure I've got the correct one that has the turning gap in it. I'm actually just going to open that so that when we go to reach through later, we can do that easily. So I'm going to open that gap. Then I am going to go and stitch the whole of this bottom seam with a 1/4 inch seam, and then I'm going to press the seam open. I'm just going to show you quickly what I'm going to use for that. Good old-fashioned sleeve board. You can put a cardboard tube or something inside if you want to. It just means that you can actually get to the seam without any problems for pressing. I will go and do that, and then we'll do the next step. So there we have our seam pressed open, and you can see now we're completing the bag here, and the lining is already on the side. So eventually we're going to reach through and pull everything through the gap. So the next thing we need to do, exactly like we did for the lining, we're going to take our gusset piece and put it right side down onto the lining. You can use as many clips as you like for this bit, and we're going to, sorry, just reaching back for some clips. We are going to clip this in position, and we're going to stitch across. I would suggest doing it from both sides, so you've got a couple of rows of stitching, just to make sure you have covered your initial stitching from in here, because that's the main thing. Is once you stitched it, flip it back and make sure you can't see any of your original stitching showing. So we're going to do that on both sides, and then we'll do the next section, which will be to join the bottom. And here we go. I will admit this is my least favourite seam to do in this entire bag, because as you're pushing everything down, the edges want to slide against each other. Use lots of clips. If you need to, you can always unpick a part of it, which I needed to because my edges had slid apart from each other. But as you can see, having gone over it a couple of times, all of the original stitching is now covered, and that's the other side as well. So we're ready to do the same as we did on the lining, and we are going to line up our marks. So that notch there lines up with that bottom seam, and then we're going to stitch between the dots. So dot on one side to the dot on the other side. I will show you when that's done. So there we go, much more straightforward seam than the one at the top, and you can see we've stitched between the two dots, and now, just like we did previously, we are going to snip down just through that one layer to just above the top of that stitching, and that will enable us to turn and get nice neat corners. So the next thing we need to do is we need to finish off our corners by stitching all 4 corner seams. Now, I won't lie to you, this bit is a little bit fiddly because again you've got these curved zips that are wanting to pull flat. The other thing you have in this section that you didn't have in the previous one is we need to match, this seam here needs to match with the top of the seam for the zip there. So that should actually both measure 1 inch minus 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. But we need to bring it down until you can match those together. I'm actually going to use a pin again, because if I can get it in. Yep, there we go. Just to hold that so that I don't pull it out accidentally. And then the rest of the seam, like we did before, just pull it slightly to straighten it and clip it into place. Now, when you go to sew this, you can, if you want to, stitch this section in so that the top part of the bag is actually stitched together in with the top part of the lining. So stitch along here and then stitch in 2 sections and stitch down, or you can just pull it back so you stitch through the top section and then just carry on down till you get to the bottom. So we're going to do that on all 4 sides, and then I will show you what it looks like. And we have done it. I will not lie, that was fiddly hard. My fingers hurt now. Your seam ripper is your friend. Lots of clips, pins, whatever you need to do to get the job done. And I will definitely say the final one, when you come to do this, is the hardest, because all of the other seams are held in place. The last one is the only one that has the ability to bounce and try and pull apart. But I had a quick check as I went along and they all look like I've pulled the stitching. The next thing I'm going to do is trim off the corners here, just to stop there from being too much bulk when we turn it. And that's the next thing we're going to do. Okay. So we've got our turning gap here. Now, I think I said that you need to leave about 6 inches and I've left about 4. So this could be challenging again. Usually I try and leave as little as possible, but I would definitely say more is better with this because of the size of this bag. So I'm going to put my hand up through here. Luckily I opened the zip earlier. And there we go. We are going to start pulling the bag through this gap. And then once we've got the bag through, we are going to start pulling the lining down. This will get speeded up. And here we have it. We'll need a little bit of taming because there's some thick layers inside. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually pull all the zips to their ends that they need to be and check that everything looks okay. So we've got a nice big compartment in there which will fit an entire full-size bottle of shampoo or micellar water or whatever you choose. We can fiddle with it with our fingers until we feel that it is right. Pull it over. So that, so we can give it a little bit of taming before we do anything else. But it is pretty much done. So last thing we need to do is we need to open this back up, pull up our lining, and we're going to fold in the edges. You can use a little bit of glue here if you think that's going to help, fabric glue. But we're going to close that gap and stitch across it. I'll go and do that and I'll show you the finished article. And there we have it. You can see I folded the edges in neatly, used a lot of clips, and then edge stitched along to close the gap. Obviously I remembered to change my thread to the correct colour. And there we go. You can see while I was off having a quick cup of coffee, I used some clips to train everything into the right shape. So we've got a nice squared off finish. And that's it at the moment. You could easily put on a handmade label on the front or do a design because you've got a nice big square area here to work on. I am now going to show you the method for making a wrist strap. Download from my website. The links will be in the description below. You can see it's called Wrist Straps 4 Ways, but of course, because I like to be awkward, I'm actually going to do it slightly differently again. You've got 4 different methods described in here. I'm going to do a hybrid version between style 1 and style 2. So we're starting off, as we frequently do, with some fabric. This is double the width we need it to be, so this is 2 inches and this is 13 inches long. So the first thing I'm going to do, exactly like we did before with our strap connector, I'm going to fold it in half and press it. I'm going to then open it out, fold it in half again and press it again. At the moment I've got no interfacing on this, and that's how I'm going to slightly change it up from what it shows in the instructions. So again, the edges into the centre and press. And what I've done now is I've got a piece of interfacing that I've cut, and I've actually cut it to 1 inch rather than the full 2 inches, and I've cut it half an inch shorter, so 1/4 inch shorter at each end. So quick moment of madness there. You'll notice that I've managed to cut it to 3/4 of an inch instead of an inch. Don't ask me how I managed that. It's been a long day and the wind is blowing like crazy out here. So what I'm going to do, just going to place that across the centre between where I have folded in with the iron, and I'm just going to lightly press it into position without going all the way to sort of really adhere it, because there's going to be some more pressing will happen in a minute. So hopefully that will hold it neatly in. So now I'm going to press that centre fold in again. I just thought, actually, because this bag is so much bigger than the previous one, and I really did want it to have a substantial strap, but not as substantial as the really fat one from style 2 in the guide. So this has given us a little bit more rigidity, particularly because this is a lovely art gallery fabric, which are quite fine and neat. So I've just tried to fold that in without repressing it and realised I'm going to have to repress it. There we go. We haven't done a lot of pressing in this video, which is very unusual for me because I use my iron all the time when I'm sewing, not otherwise I have to add. There we go. So what we're going to do next, we are going to feed on our clip, which is a standard little lobster clasp with a 1/2 inch end. Can't think what you call that bit. So I'm going to feed it on right way round, and then we're going to open out our strap and put the ends together. Now I'm going to take that to the machine and stitch across at 1/2 inch, and then we're going to press that seam open for neatness. So here we go, I've got the neatly stitched seam there at 1/4 inch. It doesn't really matter what you want to use for your seam allowance. Right, there we go. Then I'm going to press this open. Just makes for less bulk when we're stitching because we're going to have a lot of layers. And now we're going to pull on the strap to fold everything back into where it was before. I'm going to put a clip in there just to hold it together, and then I'm going to go around and pull everything. Just in case you can hear the wind, it is a named storm, but I couldn't tell you which one. We've had so many this year. Okay, any little bits of thread that are poking out, get rid before you start stitching. It makes life easier. And there we go. So what I'm going to do now, another bit of annoying thread, I'm going to take this over to the machine, and I'm actually going to edge stitch down both long edges so that everything is joined into a neat circle. We have our nice looped piece. There we go. You can see it's edge stitched all around. What I tend to do as well when I'm doing this is I start off on one side, stitch all the way around, and then stitch across at the seam and then stitch around the other way, which seems to work okay on this fabric. So what you would then do now is decide which looks like the neatest side, and I think the side that's facing out is fine. And then position your seam about 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch above the end where your clip is, and then we're going to stitch across 2 or 3 times just to make sure it's nice and secure, and then we're done. Of course, if you wanted to, you could put a rivet in instead, or a Chicago screw, but I'm going to stitch it. So there we go. I've stitched across, as you can see, forward and back a couple of times just to make sure it's nice and secure. And then we've got our lovely wrist strap. Let's attach that here. Obviously, if you don't want to have a wrist strap, then don't make the wrist strap. But I like to have one so that I can carry my bag without having to sort of wrestle with everything else that I'm trying to move around. There we go. I'll finish up with you in a second, show you everything we've been through, and that's it for now though. And we are completely done. This is the finished article. Lovely wrist strap, everything else is perfect. I think I will be giving this one to a friend. I'm going to try not to show them to all my family because I'll be making these for the next month probably otherwise. And anyway, I hope that was helpful to you. If you have any queries at all, you can contact me either by commenting below, or there's a contact me page on my website. So other than that, I'm going to say join my Facebook group, follow me on Facebook, on Instagram, and please like and subscribe to be told when my next video is due. Happy sewing!